Well, thanks for joining tonight. And a reminder, I voted today. If you haven't voted yet, remember to vote.
I took care of that a while back.
Yep.
Yeah, we do.
Early.
Absentee, you do it really early.
Tomorrow's the day to vote. But we've been talking about the Shema, and which is the first part of the Shema is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 5. And hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh is one. And as for you, you shall love Yahweh, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength.
Beautiful prayer.
It is. Any reflections on the prayer? The homework, which was to reflect on it or to take it and put it somewhere where maybe you'd see it every day.
Actually, yeah, I thought, well, I called you this afternoon and read it and reread it and reread it and reread it. And it is such a powerful prayer. And I couldn't help but think when Jesus was questioned and he turned around and he said, love the Lord, your God with everything you got, your heart, your mind, your soul, your everything. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. I thought, what a wonderful reiteration of this prayer for all of us. And I think it's a beautiful prayer, a powerful prayer, and one worthy of saying every day.
Yeah. So this prayer, Jesus would have said and known this prayer each day, and it is the heart. That peace is the heart of Christianity, and this prayer is at the heart of Judaism. This is really, we're looking at the heart of the Old Testament and the heart of the New Testament, the heart of the Abrahamic faiths right here.
Yep.
Any other reflections on it?
Well, I did try to find at the parable bookstore place, and even online, some sign that had that verse in it. They don't like Deuteronomy very much. I did find it on eBay. I did find one sign that had that. See,
maybe we'll have to have a craft night and we can make a sign. Everybody can make some signs. We've got wood carvers in this church. We've got quilters. We've got.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. You know, John, I was looking up the word Shema just online, and they have a whole bunch of stuff, mugs and little framed stuff that had it. So you just haven't looked hard enough.
I didn't look hard enough. Amazon's supposed to have everything.
No, it's not on Amazon. It was just look up the word Shema and Google it, and you'll find the merchandise. I sure did.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Toby, I know when we started this class, you said we should get t-shirts that said I read the whole Bible. This would be a good one to put on the shirt.
Yeah, I think that would be neat. I think we should get t-shirts sometime.
Oh,
maybe just to say Shema.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Can I be heard? Is my mute still on? I'm getting mixed messages. Does anyone hear me?
We can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, yes. Well, this is a reflection not on the content of the Shema, but on the resistance of human nature to being reminded, and how quickly reminders may not be useful. And I'm just wondering, I mean, and I'm hearkening back, a little bit to my 1950s, 1960s Lutheran Sunday school upbringing. And we learned about about tie them on your forehead and tie them on your arms and have you learn all this, and it's despite the best intentions, I think perhaps it can be tricky to find a way of being reminded that one does not become a nerd too.
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
I'm not understanding.
Well, then I don't see, what I did with the homework assignment is I wrote out the verse and it's on my bathroom mirror, which is my new place of putting things I really want to see.
Mhm.
What happens is after a few days, there's just,
You don't
It's
see it?
just
there.
another thing.
Okay, yeah,
Mhm.
I get it now.
I'm sure God isn't too enthused about that.
it is human nature though. It is. I mean, we get used to things and it helps us keep our sanity as well, that we don't constantly think about how our clothes feel against our skin. We don't constantly feel like or think about what our glasses feel like or our watch. And in this, but the same thing's true for things that we want to be constantly reminded of. When it's in the same place and presented in the same way every time, then it just becomes part of the background and
Mhm.
we filter it out. Which I think is partly why the Bible talks about, if we say this is like the heart of the message, it re-talks about this again and again and again and
Yeah.
again in so many different ways.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's part of why, because it's human nature. If it only said it one way,
Mhm.
then we wouldn't pay attention. I know sometimes when I get stuck on sermons, and I'm usually like, I don't know, how many more different ways can I say to people, just love each other? I don't know.
Gretchen, how come? I spent years in confirmation because it was Lutheran.
Yeah.
And I spent years in various different churches. I've never heard of this. Why isn't this stuff out there? I mean, if I walked into our church and said to probably 5 people, some Shema or whatever, they would have no idea what I was talking about.
It may be too much affiliated in our society with
With
Jewish. This
Okay.
is what Jews say to each other, and we're Christians, we're not Jews. That I don't know if that's an explanation, but it may be part of one.
I mean, this just
Some
seems to
ways.
be a really big deal. And I just didn't know
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, and our culture is also resistant to learning other languages.
Mhm.
By and large, American culture is kind of just resistant to that. And this requires looking at Hebrew and learning some Hebrew. You've been learning some Hebrew as we've been going through this class.
Yes.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think if you'd said to Christians, do you know the verse about you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, they would know that.
Yeah.
But they would relate it to the New
Because
Testament.
Jesus said it.
Right,
That's
sure,
exactly where they go to the New Testament.
right. And
Yep.
which is Jesus is repeating it from Deuteronomy. Even if you look in the Bible in your New Testament, it'll reference back to, go
Right.
look at Deuteronomy, because this is
Right.
where Jesus is getting it from.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep.
But if we say Shema, O Israel, Yahweh, then that people may not know it because we're using the Hebrew words. And usually we work do it in English.
Mhm. Mhm.
But now you'll know it in both. And we're learning 1, maybe 2 more words tonight. We'll see how far we get. So we've learned so far, Shema, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh is one. And as for you, you shall love. And that'll be the next word that we look at tonight is the word love. So the word for love that's used here in Deuteronomy 6:4-5 is ahava. Like
Aha.
or Ahav, either way, Ahava or Ahav. And you can spell it in English Ahavah.
Do that again, will you?
Ahavah.
Thank you.
Ahava. Ahava in Hebrew is a really widely defined word. Just like in English, the word for love means a lot of different things. A lot of times when we talk about the word love, we use the Greek words for love, and then we talk about, because the Greeks had all these different words for love, and we talk about like agape and all these different types of love. But in Hebrew, we don't have as many different words for love. And so we have ahava, which is love of a lot of things. So if they had tacos, they could say, I ahava tacos. If they have, they even talk about sleep. You love sleep. Ahava, sleep. You also, God ahava the people. You've got love between spouses would be ahava. We've got all different types of love that it is expressed with this one word. So let's look at this in a couple of verses. So turn to Genesis 27, verse 14.
Ouch. Ooh.
What happened?
You all right, Camille?
Yep. Minor slip up here.
Well, ouch didn't sound good.
Well, I twisted my fingers when I dropped my Bible. And, oh, now it's all dusty. That's okay.
So Genesis 27, verse 14, we have this. So this is the story of Jacob, and Jacob is trying to steal his brother's birthright, and Rebecca is telling Jacob what to do to get his brother's birthright. And Dad has asked for his favorite stew, and Esau went out to do some hunting to get it, and Rebecca's making it so that Jacob can present it. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared savory food such as his father loved. So this word for loved in Hebrew is the word ahava. And so the love of food is right here. And this is how love is used in this place. But if we go forward 2 chapters, Genesis 29, verse 20. Still in the story of Jacob. Jacob is at his uncle's Laban, and he is serving Laban as a servant. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. And so this is also ahava, and this is the love that Jacob had for Rachel, who would become his wife after another 7 years of service to Laban. So we've got love of food, we've got love of spouse, and then let's go to Deuteronomy 7. A little bit. Chapter 7, verse 8. I'm going to start reading at 7 though. It was not because you were more numerous than any other people that the Lord set God's heart on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all peoples. It was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath that God swore to your ancestors, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt.
Mhm.
Here again, in verse 8, we have, so it's Yahweh loved you, Yahweh ahava. And so this is another instance of it, and this is God's love of the people.
Mhm. So it goes both ways, both
So
from
it's-
us to God and God to us. Love is love.
Right. So it's all different types of love that are expressed in this. There's also, but we're going to come back to this one. I'll just read Proverbs quick. You don't have to turn to it. But Proverbs 20. Verse 13. Chapter 20, verse 13 is, do not love sleep, or else you will come to poverty. Open your eyes, and you will have plenty of bread, is the proverb. And so this one, again, ahava is used here, and it talks about loving sleep more than doing things. And so another usage of ahava in this place.
So they're basically using love the same way we do.
Same, very similar to the way that we do. One of the differences and similarities, because I think this also exists in English, the way we use love, is that as we look back at Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 8, God's love is done in such a way that it's not just a feeling, it's also an action is being tied to it. Just like with Shema, where to Shema means to both listen and to actively respond. To love, to ahava, it means to have that feeling of love, but also to actively respond in love.
Mhm.
So even if you love sleep, like in Proverbs, if you have a love of sleep, then you act by sleeping. If you have a love of, God has a love of God's people, and because of that love, there was also an action tied immediately with that God kept this oath that God swore to the ancestors.
It's a verb.
So it's both a noun and a verb.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's this joint of being a feeling and an action in love.
Mhm.
We also get another aspect of love. If you go to 1 Samuel chapter 18, and this is verses 1 through 4. And this is about David and Jonathan. When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David, because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. This is also in ahava, this love between Jonathan and David, and this love that is in such a way that it binds their souls to one another. And so it is a personal affection and a personal love, but it is also a very political love too.
Mhm.
Because what Jonathan does here, Jonathan stripped himself of the robe he was wearing. Jonathan would be a royal, stripped himself of the royal robe, in the royal armor, the royal sword, the royal bow, and the royal belt, and gave it to David. Which means that in a Jonathan is basically, as a successor of the kingdom, is handing this to David as well, to share this kingdom with David. And so we're having this covenant that's occurring. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. This is a personal covenant that's being made and a political covenant that's being made. And so that aspect of personal and political is also a part of ahava as well. And that piece, I think we don't always think about when we think about love in English. I don't know. I'm trying to think if there is an example of like political love. I don't hear people talk about, I love politics a lot, but
But you love your nation,
yeah,
love
there's
America, love the,
the patriotism type.
yeah.
Yeah. So that covenant piece, I don't know if that's the same or not. The way that our society is set up is so different from kingdom society, where you had this succession thing, that sometimes it's hard to draw the parallels with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But this is one, this
Well,
is
that's a
really-
collective, that's a
Right.
it's kind of like the difference between a collective love. Because when
Mhm.
we love the nation, it's a collective love as opposed to a love of like a person, a royalty or somebody in charge.
Right, yeah. Yeah. But we also have with this, and I think this Jonathan and David points it out too, is in ahava, it's connected with action, but it's also connected with obedience. And so to tie one's kingdom with someone also pledges like obedience to that person as well. And is an oath, like an unbreakable oath in that. So you get
That's kind of
within
true with love too.
Yeah, yeah. When we look at marriages are like that too, when any type of covenant or commitment that people make in between each other would be love and would be an ahava. And within
Yeah.
that, there's responsibility.
Even love for our church.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This coming Sunday is our consecration Sunday and our pledge drive. When we bring forward our pledges, and that commitment is meant to be born out of the love of our church family.
Mm-hmm.
And our generous spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and a church doesn't exist without the commitments of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot in this. And most times when you see the word love in the Old Testament, it's probably some derivative of ahava. But there are some other words for love too, but they're not used very often. So one of them would be, another word is raham, or raham, either one. I'm not doing the guttural right. It's really guttural, and it kind of hurts to say it if you're not used to saying it. But that one is tied a little more to like compassion, or mercy. So to love with compassion or to love with mercy. An example of that is in Exodus chapter 33. Verse 19. Chapter 33, verse 19.
33, okay.
And God said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you the name the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. This last part, I will show rachem on whom I will show rachem. And so this is sometimes translated as compassion. I will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. It could also be, I will show love on whom I will show love. And so there's some overlapping there with our understanding of love, the understanding of mercy, and the understanding of compassion, which there is some of that overlap in English too. To have compassion and have mercy is to show love. Another word that's sometimes used for love is dad, in Hebrew. Not used really often. It's also kind of a weird, we don't have this overlap as much in English. It also means uncle, and it means beloved and love.
What was that again?
Dad, D, like D-O-D, if to write it in English.
Oh, okay.
And
And
what
that
was
is-
that meaning?
Love, beloved, and uncle.
That's
No
strange.
wonder we can't translate easily.
So I wanted to point that out because there's some words where we're like, what exactly are we talking about here?
Yeah. I mean, how would you say I love my uncle?
And there is a name in Numbers, Eldad, which is connected with this word dad, and it means God has loved. Yeah. And so we also see it in names. So knowing a little bit of Hebrew will also make just reading those genealogies a little more interesting too,
Mhm.
because you'll get to see what are these names, what do they mean? And because
Mhm.
sometimes names, the meaning behind them is tied really closely with what's being told in the story too. So those are just some of the other words for love in Hebrew. They're not used as often. Ahava is definitely, or ahav is definitely the most used word for love in the Old Testament. But it is so, I think it's really close to there's differences because we have a different culture, but
Mhm.
I think it's something we can understand quite
Mhm.
well from our English culture too.
Mhm.
Any thoughts on that? I've got a Bible project that'll just do a summary, and then we'll look at another word tonight too.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen so we can watch. Oh, got to share sound.
Technology is great.
Yeah, I need to
If you
remember to
know how to
check
use
that
it.
little button. All right.
For thousands of years, every morning and evening, Jewish people have prayed these well-known words as a way of expressing their devotion to God. They're called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. We're going to look at the third key word in this prayer, how Israel is called to love their God. But what does that mean? Love is a very common word in most languages, as it is in ancient Hebrew. It's pronounced ahava. It most basically refers to the kind of affection or care that one person shows another. It sometimes describes physical affection, like the king of Persia's love for Queen Esther. But there are other Hebrew words that more specifically refer to physical desire or sex. Ahava is more broad. So Abraham had ahava for his son Isaac, that's parental love. Jonathan showed ahava for his friend David, that would be brotherly love. In fact, a whole group of people can have ahava for their leader, like when the Israelites showed love for their King David. Ahava can even describe loyalty between political allies, like Hiram, the king of Tyre, loved David. They had good relations, and so Hiram wanted to help David's son Solomon build the temple. These are all different kinds of affection described with the one word, ahava. Now, all of this is helpful for understanding God's ahava in the Old Testament. So in Deuteronomy, Moses told the Israelites, God showed affection for you. He chose you because of his ahava for you. So God doesn't love because the Israelites earned it or deserve it. It simply originates from God's own character. He loves because he loves. This is why Jeremiah can say that God's love is everlasting. It has no end because it has no beginning. God's love just is an eternal fact of the universe. And God's love is not a duty, it's a genuine feeling, an affection that God experiences. This is why the prophet Hosea compares God's love for his people to a husband's ahava for his wife, or to a parent showing ahava for their child. It's one of the strongest things that God feels. But that doesn't mean that God's love is just a feeling. God's love is also in action. It's something God chooses to do. Like when Moses says, because of God's ahava for your ancestors, he brought you out of Egypt with great power. God's love isn't just a sentiment, it is something God does. And so, in the Shema, Israel is called to respond to God's ahava by showing ahava in return. And just like God's love, human love is to show itself through actions. Like in Deuteronomy 10, what does the Lord your God ask of you except to fear the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to love him and serve him, and to keep his commands? All of these actions are centered around love. If I'm not doing them, I don't actually love God, I just say I do. Which leads to one last thing. In the Old Testament, I show my love for God by how I treat the people around me. In Deuteronomy, we read that God defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and he shows ahava for the immigrants among you, giving them food and clothing, and so you also show ahava for the immigrant. So the people are to imitate God's ahava by showing ahava for others. This is the idea underneath the famous line, you shall ahava your neighbor as yourself. And so at the end of the day, all of this is rooted in God's own eternal ahava. Like we read in the New Testament letter of 1 John, we love because God first loved us. And that's the Hebrew word ahava.
Hope you're enjoying this word study series.
So there's ahava. The next word we're going to look at tonight is tied pretty closely to ahava, and so we've got another Hebrew word, Shema, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh is one. And as for you, Yesha ahava, Yahweh your God with all your heart. And we're going to look at the word for heart tonight. So the word for heart is lev, L-E-V. Sometimes levev, but lev will, there's different ways depending on different endings and things on how a word would be said. But the heart in Hebrew is in some ways similar to English, but also in other ways different. So remember when we read those Mesopotamian medical texts and we learned a little bit about just the view of the brain and the body and the heart in these ancient times, in that the heart, there wasn't really a strong concept of the brain. The heart actually was understood to do all the actions of the heart and of the brain. And so the heart was that which would be in charge of intellectual thought. The heart is that which is in charge of the choices that we make. So everything that you think of that your brain does, the heart does feelings, the heart would do our emotions. It's from the heart that wisdom comes. It's from the heart that we discern and make choices. It's from the heart that we understand. All of these things are centered in the heart instead of being centered in the brain. We do talk about that still in English, I think, especially in poetry, where when we want to get down to the core of something, we might say like, I don't know, something like the heart was wise, or listen to your heart is probably a more common one, where we say, well, how do you make a decision? Well, listen to what your heart says. Really, it's your brain. You're processing it in your brain. You're making a decision, but we would say, listen to your heart. And
Did they have any concept of what the brain was?
I need to look that up. I'm not sure what the understanding of the brain was.
Because it seems like the heart was all encompassing. They knew that.
Yeah. And they understood that the heart was an organ too.
Right.
Because if you look in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 37. So 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 37. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him. He became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. So they understood he was having a heart attack. He had a heart attack, and they understood that your heart could stop, or the heart could die within one, and you could have a heart attack. And so they understood that there was a physical aspect to it. So when they talk about the heart, it's not just emotions and thoughts, it's also the physical aspect. But at the same time, with heart, if we go forward to 2 Samuel chapter 7. Verse 3.
Oh, yeah.
Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that you have in mind, for the Lord is with you."
Oh, mine says, do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you.
Oh,
What do other
interesting.
translations say?
I have mine.
I
You
have
have
mine.
mine?
The NIV is not mine.
But that's interesting that they have heart.
Yeah. So even when it's being translated in English, the concept of heart that's being used in this verse is closer to our concept of mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in Hebrew, they're using the word heart here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get this overlap. I mean, it's different. If we say in English, go and do what you have on your mind versus go and do what you have on your heart, that to me has a different meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Is it for
Yep.
others?
Yeah. I would think if you said go and do what is in your heart, you're going to go and attend to what you consider one of your passions. You know, I consider the mind a bit more logical in my heart, but my heart sometimes leads me in the right direction as well.
But you know, in those days, the heart was a thing. When people died, it was a thing you could hold in your hand.
Mhm.
And your brain was a whole bunch of things that would, if you take your brain out, it all falls apart. And so it seems like a lot of the things that we might think that we use in our brain, they ascribe to the heart.
Yeah.
Did they know about, I mean, did they have a concept of what brains were?
I'll have to look it up. I'm really not sure what the understanding of brain was. I wonder.
I don't
wonder
think-
that too.
I don't think so.
I don't either, because, you know, like I said, it's not something you can really hold in your hand.
Right. But
Like a kidney or a, you know, a heart, yeah, a heart.
Well, they wouldn't be doing anything like autopsies anyway.
Well, but if somebody got their head chopped off, they'd see it, you know, I mean, if they saw
Mhm.
or got it, you know, some
Mhm.
trauma to their head.
Mhm.
So they would do dissections afterwards. Essentially
really?
autopsies.
Oh, they
Yeah.
did?
Yeah, so that wasn't something that was had because there's medical texts that talk about looking at human dissections and things.
Huh. Okay.
That they did an extensive study of the body as well. They didn't know what it all did, but they had theories and would follow a scientific process with a religious process as well.
I didn't know that.
But the brain is so different from any other organ.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't like any other organ.
We know so little about the brain
Yeah,
even now. But we're able to know more about the brain just because we can measure the electrical impulses, which would have been not understood at that time, of how do you measure these electrical impulses from the brain.
I wonder what they thought that was up there.
Yeah. Maybe I'll have to look and see if I can find anything on,
I'm sure they got headaches,
yeah, I'm sure they did.
drinking all that wine.
Yeah.
Well, they must have also, if they were injured in their head and seen the results of it without dying.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there were head injuries.
And
That
not all
would,
people died, but they would
right,
have lingering injuries forever, afterwards.
mhm.
yeah. But remember at this time, any medical issues were also tied with that you did something or the gods were angry at you.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Or there were demons, that there
Mhm.
were supernatural things in the world at work too. So that changes what you would do and how you would think about what the brain might be doing as well. Because I mean, we have stories too of, think about stories of people who suddenly can't speak for a period of time. And the
Aphasia?
reason in the Bible that they
Yeah.
can't speak for a period of time is because God has struck them so they cannot speak. Maybe they had a stroke. Maybe there's something else that happened too.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't even have been considered at
Yeah.
that time. We
Mhm.
also, let's go to Judges. We're going to turn back to Judges chapter 16. Another understanding of the heart. 16 verse 25. So mine in the NRSV says, and when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson and let him entertain us. So they called Samson out of prison and he performed for them. They made him stand between the pillars.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this was one of their last merry acts then. But so the heart is where joy and merriment comes from as well.
Mhm.
So that's where you feel that joy. So we've got, the heart is this physical thing where you could have a heart attack. We've got the heart where that it's what your mind thinks of as well and makes those decisions. And it's also these feelings of the heart. And if we go to Proverbs, so into the wisdom literature, chapter 4. Verse 23. Sometimes Proverbs is translated differently in different Bibles, so I'd be interested in others too.
What,
But
what
mine's
chapter and verse in Proverbs?
chapter 4.
Oh, chapter 4. Okay. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna actually start reading at verse 20.
20.
My child, be attentive to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them and healing to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Others
Mhm.
have it translated a little differently.
Um,
Well, in the NIV, the chapter 20, verse 21 is, do not let them out of your sight, keep them written on your heart. And then 23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it.
So we have this even deeper concept of heart here, where all of life flows from your heart. So everything, it's not just our thoughts, not just our feelings, but like the very essence of a person, the very life force flows from the heart as well.
Yeah, it would make sense, because when your heart's gone, you're dead.
Yeah.
And that's all they know.
We also have the heart is used to talk about theories of and philosophies of human nature in the Bible as well. So if we jump forward to Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. So remember, Jeremiah is living in a time when the people are not listening to God at all. And there's just a lot of things happening. There's a lot of injustice. There's a lot of lack of caring for other people, a lack of following God's command to love your neighbor as yourself, to be, because remember, a lot of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is very social justice focused as we move through. And so this is what Jeremiah says about the heart. So chapter 17, verse 9. The heart is devious above all else. It is perverse. Who can understand it? So Jeremiah basically felt the heart at its core is just broken. At its very core, like human nature is devious and cannot be understood and is broken.
You know, my verse 10 reads, I, the Lord, search the mind and try the heart to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings. So we've got mind and heart indicated there.
Yep. What's your verse 9?
The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately corrupt. Who can understand it? And then 10, I, the Lord, search the mind and try the heart, etc., etc.
The NIV says, I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind.
Okay. Let's see here. I don't know. Let's see what Hebrew words are behind that.
You know, I found another reference to the heart in Jeremiah in chapter 13. Chapter 13, verse, I can't see it, 10. This evil people who refuse to hear my words, who stubbornly follow their own hearts and have gone after other gods to serve them and worship them, shall be like this waistcloth, which is good for nothing.
Now, I don't have heart, I have will.
Will in 10?
Hmm?
Is that in verse
Stubbornly
10?
follow their own will, not their own heart.
Okay.
I've got heart. That's in chapter 13, verse
Yeah.
what, 10.
Okay.
10.
Yeah.
And this is where something like in interlinear Bible could be helpful. So we've got this, the heart is devious above all else. If we look at 10, so in the NRSV is also has the words mind and heart. I, the Lord, it says Lord in all caps, so we know that's Yahweh. Test the mind and search the heart. Well, what does it say in Hebrew? In Hebrew, the word that's being translated as mind is actually the word kilia, which means a kidney.
Oh,
Oh my
wow.
gosh.
Or a
Oh,
heart,
my.
or the inward parts.
Yeah, I was
Or
thinking
a
it's just
mind,
anything in there, anything in
or
there.
something within yourself
Yeah,
is what it is being translated as.
Mm-hmm.
it's gotta
So-
be interesting when they did cut somebody open. You know, when they were dead and you saw all this and how they processed it. And this is kind of the way they did.
Yeah. But it's the same word that's used in like sacrifices when they think they're talking about kidneys. So, which wouldn't make sense in English if you said, I, the Lord, test the kidney and search the heart
Yeah.
and give to all according to their ways, according to the fruit of their doings. Well, okay, whatever that means. So this is where we understand it when we say the mind, but it's the inward parts. It's something within us.
Mm-hmm.
But so when you're looking at the word mind, sometimes we limit what a word means. Like when we think of the mind, we only think of our intellectual thoughts sometimes. But when you're seeing the word mind in the Bible, it's being translated probably from a variety of words as you're seeing here. And so it's not just your intellectual thoughts, it's a lot more that's being encompassed.
Right.
Including your kidneys.
Okay.
Well, we've got one more video. It's 3.5 minutes on the heart. And so I'm going to share my screen again. And it's from the Bible Project.
For thousands of years, every morning and evening, Jewish people have prayed these well-known words as a way of expressing their devotion to God. They're called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. We're going to look at the fourth key word in this prayer, heart, which in Hebrew is sometimes pronounced levav, or more often in a shorter form, lev. Now, different cultures throughout history have had different conceptions of how the human body works, and this is also true of the ancient Israelite writers of the Bible. They knew that the heart was an organ in the chest that sustains life. There's mention of a heart attack in the Bible, Naval, whose heart died inside of him and he became like stone. But the biblical authors talk about the heart in many other ways that might seem strange to modern readers, and that's because these Israelites had no concept of the brain or any word for it. They imagined that all of the human's intellectual activity takes place in the heart. For example, you know with your heart in the Bible. Your heart is where you understand and make connections. In the book of Proverbs, wisdom dwells in the heart. And your heart is what you use to discern between truth and error, like Solomon did when he was king. So the heart is where you think and make sense of the world, and it's where you do more. In the Bible, the heart is where you feel emotions. You feel pain in your heart, like Hannah did when she couldn't have any children. In fact, the phrase a broken heart comes from ancient biblical Hebrew. You also experience fear in your heart. Your heart can melt or be distressed. Your heart can even be depressed. But then on the flip side, your heart is where you experience joy. In Hebrew, to be happy is to be good of heart, or to have a heart of joy. So the heart is the generator of physical life. It's also the center of your intellectual and emotional life, and there's more. In biblical Hebrew, the heart is where you make choices motivated by your desires. So David had it in his heart to build a temple for God. Your heart is where your affections are centered. They're called the desires of your heart. And if you really want something and go after it, it's like what Nathan said to David, whatever's in your heart, go and do it. So then, in the Bible, the heart is the center of all parts of human existence, as in the well-known proverb, guard your heart, because from it flows your whole life. Now, the prophet Jeremiah believed that the human heart was fundamental.
You froze. Let's see if we can get it back synced.
After it, it's like what Nathan said to David, whatever's in your heart, go and do it. So then, in the Bible, the heart is the center of all parts of human existence, as in the well-known proverb, guard your heart, because from it flows your whole life. Now, the prophet Jeremiah believed that the human heart was fundamentally broken. He said, the heart of a human is deceitful above all, irreversibly sick. Who can even understand it? He had watched a whole generation turn away and said to David, "Whatever's in your heart, go and do it." So then, in the Bible, the heart is the center of all parts of human existence, as in the well-known proverb, "Guard your heart, because from it flows your whole life." Now, the prophet Jeremiah believed that the human heart was fundamentally broken. He said, "The heart of a human is deceitful above all, irreversibly sick. Who can even understand it?" He had watched a whole generation that were a good thing. So this is why, in the imagination of the Hebrew prophets, the only hope for humanity is the total renewal of the human heart. Moses predicted that if Israel was ever going to love their God, their heart would need to be circumcised, which is a very vivid and surprising metaphor about removing evil and stubbornness from the human heart. David, after he committed murder and adultery, pleads with God to create in me a pure heart. The prophet Ezekiel hoped for a day when God would remove the heart of stone and give his people a new heart of soft flesh, which is very similar to Jeremiah's hope that God would write the commands of the Torah on the hearts of his people. And that brings us all the way back to the Shema. Every day, God's people are called to devote to God their whole body and mind, their feelings and their desires, their future and their failures. This is what it means to love the Lord your God with all of your heart.
Sorry, that video started spinning in the middle. I always put the original link to the video in the description on the recording. And so if you want, you're able to go to that recording and watch the original video. I think you got all the words though, just the pictures were frozen for parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting because you realize the one thing they knew was if your heart was damaged, you died. You know, they didn't, you know, if you had a brain damage, you didn't die instantly, you know, or another one, a kidney or whatever. So the brain was, or the heart was where everything was. It was all light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not just physically, but in
That's what I
every
mean,
other
mentally,
way as
everything.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emotionally,
know that.
psychologically, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, you could lose limbs and still live, but if you lost your heart. And then if you think about blood too, blood is such a life force.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But by then they knew that it went through the heart.
Right. They would have known that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you could see that.
Yeah. They just didn't know what the brain was.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and if you think about it, when you have really strong emotions, you feel it in like the core of your being too. So just even feeling, well, my feelings must be coming from my heart, because when you have really strong emotions, your body responds, your heart's pumping different, and they would be feeling that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Lev and Ahava that we've learned. So in the Shema, we have Shema, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh is one. And as for you, you shall Ahava Yahweh your God with all your Lev, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And so our next word is soul that we'll start looking at next week.
This is so cool.
Good.
Uh-huh. Yeah, very, very, very.
For homework, I'd like you to read the story of David and Jonathan, because this story in it talks both about soul and heart and love in this. So 1 Samuel chapters 18 through 20.
Okay.
Sometimes I think we skip over this story, but it's such an important part of the Bible, and I think it really informs David's understanding of God too, having experience with love of Jonathan. Well, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Gretchen. This is great.
Yeah.
Really, really
My
good.
Bible is beginning to look like my college textbooks.
And that's okay. That's a
I know.
good thing.
When somebody picks it up years from now, they're gonna go, what?
What?
But yeah, yes. That's good.
That's a good thing. I
Well, at least it's not just sitting on a shelf.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. I
Okay.
usually tell the kids when we give them a Bible, I tell them when this is falling apart because you've used it so much, then you get a new one for free. Just let me know.
Why would you want to do one?
I have yet
All
to
your
have
stuff,
them.
all your notes are in the other one.
That's true. You just need
Yeah,
to duct tape
that's
it
true.
together.
That's true.
Yeah. Indeed. Very good.
Oh.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you
too.
so